Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Swati Taneja, and as a Training Production Director with Informa Middle East, I'm delighted to welcome all our attendees today on an informative, really topical webinar on a topic which is why has a recent change in the global oil price caught so many organizations out? The webinar will be led by Phil Griffiths. I'm sure most of us in the region know Phil already, but just to give you a brief introduction about Phil, Phil is the founder and managing director of Business Risk Management Limited, a chartered accountant. He has over 25 years experience in risk management, internal audit, and fraud prevention as a practitioner, professional advisor, facilitator, and a trainer. Before we begin our webinar, I'd like to give you a few tips on our housekeeping rules for the afternoon. The slides that you'll be seeing will be available on a slide share page, and a link will be emailed to you in the next couple of days. The recording of the webinar will be available to download, and the link for the same will also be emailed. Please take the time to complete a post-webinar survey that will pop up on your screen at the end. You can type your questions throughout the session, and the time in the end will be allocated for the speaker to address your questions. Without further delay, now I would like to hand over to your webinar leader for the afternoon, Phil, and I hope you enjoy the webinar for the next 45 minutes to an hour. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Phil Griffiths, as Swati has said there. A warm welcome. I hope you're going to enjoy this webinar on why the global oil price change may have caught so many organizations out. I think the difficulty with major events is how can you actually spot those? Most people would realize that the most successful organizations are the ones that can predict some of those and at least have actions in place to deal with them. I think it's regarded as a differentiator now. I think part of the difficulty is the volatility in the world. As we know, you only need to look now at the political issues, the economic issues, things like currency variations and so on. Enterprise risk management, which is one of the topics that I cover in my training programs with Informa, is really trying to bring together all the issues that might highlight a problem to you or an opportunity and make sure that those are recognized. One of the questions, I suppose, is do you all have an ERM or enterprise risk management process in place? One thing I'm going to try and look at is how many of those issues are identified, particularly the future events. You can look at these as a business differentiator. If you look at, for example, Apple recently, despite their rather poor sales of iPads in the last quarter of 2014, their profit of $18 billion, the highest ever, as I'm sure you're aware, in a 3-month period, demonstrates a lot of understanding of the market and obviously makes a difference to them. The one question you can look at, they've had issues, they've had risks in there, the impact of loss of Steve Jobs, probably not fully appreciated at the time. I think you would say they've bounced back from that one, definitely. If you look at Dubai, where I'm doing this webinar now, no one would disagree that's one of the best success stories there's ever been in terms of changing the way a city and indeed a country is seen. But they, like many, didn't expect the 2008-9 crash. Now, the issue is, if these things are happening and there's more of those, why are they not necessarily being predicted? Is it possible that the disciplines we have in place are a bit too historic? They look back rather than forward. If we have a look at the really major events, you look at the large fall in the global oil prices. I mean, they have changed dramatically, haven't they? We're now working around the $40-odd per barrel. Considering it was 140, that's a very, very different situation, isn't it? I don't think many organizations really predicted that fully. Did any of your ERM processes predict such a significant change? In many ways, is that really any different to what happened in other areas like 2008? You can look at some of the other areas in terms of natural disasters. Is this something that we just have to look back on and go, oh my goodness? Or is it something that can be predicted? I suppose if you look at it and you look at the real impact of low oil prices, it depends which sector you're in as to whether or not it really affects you dramatically. I think what is left is an uncertainty to people. I think whatever sector, there has been this sort of issue associated with it. As I've put on the slide here, if you're buying all forward, let's say as an airline or another major user of oil, if you buy it forward when the price is $140 and you pay $95, that seems a good deal. But if it falls to $45 when you're buying, say, 2 years in advance, maybe that's not such a good thing. Does this question the whole idea of futures and buying futures? I'm aware that some businesses that I have worked with recently are suggesting that they've been significantly disadvantaged by buying forward. So some are actually saying we're questioning whether or not that's necessary or whether we should do that. The other issue, I suppose, is it depends which sector you're in. If you're in the oil sector directly, then clearly the change in oil price affects you dramatically. But of course, it may well be that you have to judge the effectiveness. In a recent article, I was reading that the Saudi government were making statements about, when asked about what will the oil price at lower levels affect significantly, they have said that they are extremely resilient to that, and even at $40 a barrel wouldn't affect dramatically for a good number of years. Now, of course, other countries, as we hear just recently this week, Libya, for example, you know, is facing a very dire situation potentially if the oil price stays at that level. So I suppose we need to look at and say what's gone wrong. If anything has gone wrong, is that the right way to look at it? The last 10 years has shown us that the world can expect a lot of change, a lot of volatility. Will that volatility increase? I would suggest probably yes. I think it will. We're getting more changes in the stock market. They go up and down dramatically. Used to be minor changes. The question is, why would they move so much? Are they linked in to the performance of the companies, as used to be? Probably less so now. Now the question is, therefore, what does that mean in terms of what we can predict? And particularly as much of the world is dependent, particularly for pensions and those type of things, and what happens during that area, that's quite difficult. The other thing you need to look at is, who then are the real impactors of the oil price? Is it the oil companies? Is it OPEC? Are they governments? That's a difficult area, isn't it, really? And it's one, it depends where you're sitting as to how important and how significant that is. So I guess if you look at some of these areas, it leads us to question maybe the whole process about identifying risks and opportunities. Because, of course, a risk for one organization could easily be an opportunity for another, and obviously a country that can affect as well. So the next question is, what else is there out there? Is there anything lurking which might be some things we're not looking for? I obviously do a lot of work and training with both risk managers and also auditors. And clearly the message for auditors and risk managers is, are we looking forward? Is the past a predictor of the future anymore? Which I guess many people would say maybe not, maybe isn't quite the way it has been before. And as I highlight on this particular slide, what should the role of the assurance providers, risk management, internal audit, compliance, health and safety, environmental audit, etc. be? Are they trying to protect an organization? Are they trying to help it look forward and understand and manage those issues? Or is it not seen that way? Is it still seen as something that's somebody else's job? Now, the only problem with that is, who else is there? I'd like to show you some of the output from a survey that was done by Aon. You may well know the name, Aon, one of the very big insurance providers, and they did a survey in mid-2014, and I've just picked out a few of the issues that they felt were crucial based on the people who responded to that and the implications, if you like, for 2015 and beyond. As you'll see, one of the things they were highlighting was that an ERM culture, enterprise risk management culture, that encourages engagement of all levels of the organization, and particularly at the senior management level, allows you to hopefully identify some of these issues, which might otherwise only happen when they've happened, you might want to look at. My experience is quite often risk management is seen as something that's taken down the organization, but not always something that's identified at a high level. Maybe the board. Does the board actually have risk workshops looking at the strategic risk? Certainly they should. The only question, I suppose, is what about the wider issues of the stakeholders? As I've highlighted again on the slide. What about the stakeholders? Are they asked to have some involvement in this sort of area? Would you go and ask your customers, your suppliers, the government, your regulatory bodies, etc.? They should have some input to that as well. If we look at another element from this survey, again, this is a very significant issue that was highlighted, and they're saying identification of new and emerging risks is extremely important. And the information available to that is not just from the external market or what's happening outside that, but what might be happening within your organization, and collecting information, data, near misses, those type of issues. I think there tends to be not sufficient identifier of maybe surprises or potential surprises. Quite often a near miss has the ability to turn into something much more serious if it's not taken account of. The danger is with near misses, they can easily be swept under the carpet, and perhaps people don't necessarily recognize what they will be. One of the difficulties here is, where do we get the information from? Can we validate it? You know, is it likely to be accurate? And again, sometimes that's difficult. We say, well, we'll know when it happens. That's a bit too late, isn't it? I think that's a bit like saying, we'll develop a new IT system, but we'll fail to engage the users of that until too late. And then they'll go, oh, all we're going to get is a quicker version of the same one. So I think there are, again, quite a lot of challenges within that area. The other thing that the survey says is the focus needs to be on moving from avoiding risk to using it as a leverage. So in other words, using this as an opportunity to extract value. If we look at the most successful organizations in the world, they tend to be the ones that perhaps understand this and are able to use the benefits that may be there. Just because some organizations are managing the risk maybe poorly, others would probably manage it really well. I suppose an example would be, in terms of confidence issue, airlines. If you typically ask some airlines in Europe or the US, etc., that they will say that maybe things aren't quite as positive as they would like. But if you go and speak to organizations in the Middle East, Emirates, Etihad, Qatar, etc., the different message comes through. They go, oh, it's very buoyant, things are excellent, and things are looking really good. Is that an issue in terms of focus? Is it in terms of belief? They're all flying in the same skies after all, aren't they? So what I think this issue is, how do we actually use risk and leverage it? This is something that I cover in my 2 training courses here with Informa. One is on ERM, and if necessary I can show you some of the information based on that later on. And then we have an advanced ERM, which tends to look at these issues of measuring, evaluation, and so on. Then we move forward and we take account of, I don't know if any of you have come across this, the Medici Principle. Now, the Medici family were regarded as the first bankers, the first banking family. And they set a principle, which unfortunately I think some of the banks in 2008 probably forgot in some parts of the world. They said no single part of any business should be able to critically impact the whole thing. So that means you need to understand that and actually put a risk tolerance, a risk appetite in terms of deciding to ring fence, as it is, the exposure. The clever organizations understand how far they would be willing to go in that, and equally understand how they can leverage that issue. So could that happen to your business? Do you have things in there which you feel could be very significant to the whole business? Or is that not going to be possible? Is that something that's not going to happen? So that leads you into this idea of ERM. You know, ERM, the intention behind that is, as it's stated, enterprise risk management. That you should have one process, one activity. You do not want to have 7 different processes across the business. I think some organizations would say, oh, we have a completely different method for health and safety, using a different evaluation process, use another one for financial, operational risks are identified in another way, and therefore there's no way of bringing all that information together. And this particular issue, when we look at examples like the oil change prices and so significant, this is sometimes called a black swan. Now, a black swan is regarded as a very, very rare, unlikely event, but one that is extremely significant. And it was coined because of that issue, because black swans are quite rare, and people tend to like to see those when they happen. The issue with these, we do not want the black swan events to happen to your organization. So the real question is anybody looking for this? You could argue, and this is not something that's officially coined, you could look for the opposite of those. Maybe you could call those blue diamonds. I don't know. I mean, blue diamonds are extremely rare, aren't they? But very nice to have. So maybe organizations need to spend a bit more time understanding the emerging risks, you know, what those are and what the real effect on the organization will be. There is a reason why I believe the current method used by organizations mean that these black swans are sometimes not identified. And what I want to just show you is an example of a risk matrix. Now, most of you, when you have your risk management process, will have some form of risk matrix. I apologize for the left-hand side where some of the wording has slightly disappeared from there. Basically, the only way of evaluating a risk and measuring it is by impact and likelihood. I tend to use the example of driving a car. Most of you probably will drive a car. When you ask people what's the biggest risk to you in driving a car, there's a view, there's different views, other drivers, you know, things like this. But if you look at the ultimate risk, that would clearly be, I assume you would agree, having an accident that potentially causes your death. Now, when you look at that and you go, how likely is that? We tend to go, oh, it's not very likely, which is true, because otherwise none of us would get in the car. But if you look at it and say, what can we do to reduce the likelihood of having an accident, then there are positive things we can take, which unfortunately most people do not do. Let me give you some examples. Driving slower, keeping to the speed limits. Can you honestly say you haven't driven faster the speed limit in the last month? Most organizations and people would say no to that. We know where the cameras are. So people go really fast to the camera, slow down, then speed up afterwards. It's not really the way you should do it, is it really? What about checking your tire pressures? When was the last time you checked the pressure in your tires or you had somebody else do it? And bear in mind, your life is dependent on those. And we go, oh, there'll be something on the dashboard that comes on and tells us. What if that fails? What if that doesn't happen? What about the seat belt? Oh, we always wear a seat belt. What about in the back of the car? Do you wear your seat belt in the back of the car? Not everybody does. Now that's strange, isn't it? We go, hang on, we manage our risk. Do we really? If we don't, does your business? Chances are the answer is no. So what I'm going to show you here on your slide is a risk matrix. I picked a 5x5 matrix. You could indeed have 4x4, 3x3, or whatever you want. Most organizations tend to multiply these two elements together, impact and likelihood. And that's a typical thing using a Boston box as this is. So as you will see, if you look at the top right of this, you score a 5 on each axis, 5x5 is 25. Similarly, you score the rest. Now, the problem with the box at the bottom right, this is your black swan box, very unlikely, but really huge impact on you. When you multiply the two numbers together, it only scores 5. Now, 5 out of 25 is very small, we think. So the danger is it's not encouraged for organizations to identify things in that box. Now, I would look, if you look at the one top left, that scores 5 as well. Is that the same as that one down here? Is that the same? I mean, the top left means it's going to happen all the time, but the impact is tiny. Are you telling me those two are the same? I would fundamentally disagree with that. The one in the middle scores 9, nearly double it. This is fundamentally wrong. Now, most people in risk management have traditionally done this type of evaluation. We have been suggesting for years this is not the right way to do it. But not everybody is actually picking this up and listening. Even the Institute of Risk Management are now recognizing that there may be a more appropriate way. Now, I'm just going to show you an alternative way which will mean these black swans will be identified. So let's have a look. This is exactly the same box with the same colors on there, but instead of multiplying the numbers together, what I have done here, I have taken the 25 boxes and numbered them sequentially 1 to 25. So the top right box is the most important one. The one underneath it is the next most important because impact is regarded as more significant than likelihood. So that scores 24. This is not a score, it's an identifier for the box. Then the next one, you move up to the box, which is number 23, that is regarded as the next most significant. Or if you prefer, do it from the green zone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Now, as you'll see with that, now, and it tends to go down diagonally in terms of an evaluation, so that bottom right box, the black swan, now has a 15 attached to it. Because that essentially is the 11th most important box in there. Now you are going to get some attention on that one because people go, oh my goodness, this is not a small 5, it's quite a big 15. And now look at the one on the top left, that scores 11. So we're going down in significance terms. So if you use that, and this I explain in some greater detail within the training courses, will make a huge difference to the way organizations identify and, of course, reflect and deal with some of these issues. Because you don't want to be over-managing some of these other ones, but you need to be recognizing these black swans. That's the reason why there's a section colored in brown on here. Many organizations just say red, yellow, and green, but I think it's good to have this intermediary one and also identify whether any of these situations are comfortable to you. There is something which organizations call risk appetite, which would be how much risk are we willing to take? Are we able to take? Are we allowed to take? And quite often, a line can be drawn round this brown zone, which basically say really things to the right of that are probably going to be really either unacceptable totally if they're red or very unlikely to be accepted if they're brown. Typically the others would be more okay. Now if we just move along and we look at how we manage the emerging risks, here we are, here's the mouse who's recognizing risk. I don't know whether that necessarily will help, probably will. Obviously that's a Photoshop picture, I don't know, there's too many minds who have been at that, but okay. So let's have a look. Emerging risks are very important to identify. They are the ones that sometimes haven't occurred or are very early stage of being known. We could probably look at opportunities related to that, but equally risks themselves. They've recently started looking at the idea of maybe printing body parts on a 3D printer. There was somebody in Britain recently that had a very damaged face and had a new face printed on a printer for him with his own DNA. Now that's actually extremely exciting, but it brings lots of moral dilemmas and potential risks involved. What we're looking at here are risks that might grow in significance and they don't have a track record. You can't really see them, and sometimes you're surprised when they happen. So let's look at some examples of emerging risks. There's quite a number of these we could look for. Nuclear energy. If you think of the situation in Japan, that started to get people a little jumpy, certainly in that country, about the use of nuclear energy. It doesn't necessarily mean it's obviously a thing we need to change dramatically, but maybe it reviews the people's thoughts. Climate change, you know, are we taking that seriously? We are starting to now, I think. I think there's a recognition that we have to take some action. Flooding, famine, they are becoming more pronounced in some parts of the world. That's a real issue. We need to understand that. Does that affect every business? No. But we need to be aware of it. Earthquakes. I mean, San Francisco, as we know, is hugely overdue for a devastating earthquake that they feel they will not really be able to deal with. They probably will devastate that city. Now, they can do a certain number of things, but they don't know when it's going to happen. What about social media? That's seen as a very good thing, but what's the impact on an organization, particularly reputationally? You know, have this been something that's been taken seriously? I know many organizations, as yet, in my experience, do not have even a proper policy for the use of social media within the business context. Now, that's really important, isn't it? Because, you know, we need to understand the wider picture on that one. Another example, shale oil. That's given a great deal of attention at the moment. But equally, countries are now saying, do we really want shale oil? Is it going to be, what's that going to do to our country? Are we going to have to move lots of things out of the way, etc.? Now, all I'm saying is we need to be aware of these issues and we need to make sure that there are actions taken on quite a number of these areas. So to leave you with a couple of final things, I suppose the argument should be, what should we do? Are there lessons we can learn from all these issues? I tend to think it's a bit like a project which comes to the end and the temptation is we'll move to another project. Is that a sensible thing? Do we actually learn the messages from this, or do we try and ignore those? Do we try and say, oh, it's okay, it's all right, let's move on, we don't need to worry? The other thing, I suppose, is to look at it, can we actually do anything to deal with this? From an assurance point of view, whether you're looking at risk or audit or all these areas, why don't we actually coordinate the efforts? I don't see that very often either. Do we actually get people together so they can decide what the best action is together, to coordinate the efforts? Because it doesn't matter who identifies these emerging risks as long as somebody does. Who's asking the question? Who's putting the issues to the board? Are there areas that perhaps we need to look at differently? Is it a board issue? Is emerging risk on the board agenda? Equally, is opportunity management? Many organizations that I've worked with, alongside the board looking at risks, they require each director to come along, or VP, with some examples of what opportunities we could take. Then have a discussion about that and see whether it's worth doing. Equally, as to finish this particular little sessions, and then I'll answer any questions you might have. As you will see here, I do a number of events with Informa public courses. Clearly also in-house courses are also available on these topics. I've picked three which are the main issue, the main focus on here. Enterprise risk management, which is really talks about the process, the measurement, the activities, to help you, if you haven't got one, to embed this process in your organization. Advanced ERM, it takes it to the next level. If you already have an ERM process in place and you want to enhance it, improve it, there's a lot of focus on different measurement techniques and emerging risks particularly. And if you happen to be in the audit function or you know people are in that, the risk-based audit approach is the only one that's now really acceptable to the Institute of Internal Auditors and covers the issues from an internal audit and assurance perspective. You can see the dates there. Obviously, there's full information there on the Informa ME website if you want to go and have a look at those. Okay, so I think that probably brings me to the end. If there are any questions? Okay. Okay, there's a question here from Salah Sada. The question is, what is the rocket gas? Is there a rocket oil too? That's a very interesting. I'm not quite sure about that. Rocket gas, I have to say I've never really heard that. Rocket oil may be something that's we put when we're trying to get to the moon. I'm not really sure about that one. I apologize for the interference, incidentally. I think, Lynn, you highlighted that. I think I've probably got the microphone slightly closer to my chin than I should, so probably a bit late to do something about that one. Salah, if you want to say something more about that, you know, I just wondered where you'd come across that, where you'd heard that from. It's a bit of a new one on me. I think a number of you have come on here. Is there any further questions anyone would like to ask? I don't know whether I have confused everybody or you feel everything has been covered. I mean, what I was really trying to do here was just sort of stimulate some thoughts, ideas, to try and get you to decide forward whether or not there's other things you might need to take. Okay, well, it doesn't seem as though too many people are asking further questions. If you do want to find any further information out and you would like to send a message through to Informa or indeed directly to myself, you will have seen on one of the earlier slides my email address is there. I'd be delighted to hear from you and I can give you any further information that you wish. So I'd like to thank you very much indeed for attending this webinar. And thank you for those of you who have come along and say thank you. So I'm grateful for that. This is the first one of these I've actually done, so it's a little bit strange talking to myself, you know, which I've done in this particular case. But I hope it's been valuable to you. And please look out because there'll be further webinars that will come along probably next month or April in the topic areas that I deliver. So, okay. Bao, I think you were saying that this is your first webinar too. Well, that's okay. I think we're probably learning together really on that one. So, as I say, I hope you've enjoyed it and I look forward to welcoming you to a further webinar in the not too distant future. Thank you very much indeed.